Our second winner in the National Network Program category is ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos. This is George's second win. Last time he couldn't make it at the very last minute, the Virginia Tech shooting, as I recall. And he was cited for the incisive, compelling nature of his reports, as well as his thorough preparation. Over a 2-year period in his On the Trail series, George hit the road for in-depth interviews with 14 presidential candidates, from early primary and caucus states through the convention. Here are some excerpts.
When you ran for senator in 1994, you supported the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy on gays in the military as what you called it a first step that will ultimately lead to gays and lesbians being able to serve openly and honestly in our nation's military. Is that still the goal, that gays and lesbians should be able to serve openly and honestly in the military?
Well, Don't Ask, Don't Tell has worked well. We're in the middle of a conflict. Now is not the time for a change in that regard. And I don't have a policy posture as to allowing gays in the military to serve there openly. But I can tell you that I'm against discrimination against people who are gay and lesbian.
I don't understand that you don't have a policy posture. Before you thought that they should be able to.
I'm not in favor of changing it. I'm in favor of leaving it as it is.
That current policy labels homosexuality as a defect. Is that what you believe?
I'm not going to suggest that I'm in any way a psychologist. That's a decision the psychologist would have to tell you, and I'm not going to weigh in on that. What I can tell you is I oppose discrimination on the basis of race, gender, but also sexual preference. I'm not in favor of discrimination in that regard, but I do favor and have always favored traditional marriage and oppose same-sex marriages. At the national level, we should define marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman.
And a lot of people wonder what kind of role he will play in the White House. You've spoken about his role as a roving ambassador. Take us inside the White House. Something happens like the assassination of Benazir Bhutto the other day. President Bush had a teleconference with his national security team. Would President Clinton be on that call in your White House?
Probably not. I think he would play the role that spouses have always played for presidents, which is a very important role. And I know that firsthand, but I also know it from history. So no National Security Council meetings? No, that wouldn't be appropriate. He will not have a formal official role. But just as presidents rely on wives, husbands, fathers, friends of long years, he will be my close confidant and advisor, as I was with him.
You've also taken some heat this week with your comments saying that Senator Obama would rather lose a war than win a political campaign.
Yeah.
I can't believe you believe that.
Well, I'm not questioning his patriotism. I'm questioning his actions. I'm questioning his total lack of understanding.
But that is questioning his patriotism. When you say someone would rather lose a war, a candidate, that's questioning his honor, his decency, his character.
All I'm saying is, and I will repeat, he does not understand.
Senator McCain said that she actually has more national security experience than you. Here's what he told Charlie Gibson.
Alaska's right next to Russia. She understands that. She's the commander of the Alaska National Guard. He has no experience on these issues. She has been in charge, and she has had national security as one of her primary responsibilities.
Well, look, I actually knew that Russia was next to Alaska as well. I saw it on a map.
It's not a qualification.
I don't think it is.
But how about the National Guard executive experience?
I know that John McCain was offended, or at least his campaign was, when she was asked, or one of his representatives was asked, what decisions did she make while she was heading up the National Guard? And they didn't have a response. But look, it's going to be your job.
No, but he's saying she has more national security experience than you do.
I understand, and I think that as somebody who served on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and passed legislation on critical issues like nuclear proliferation, as somebody who's been working on these issues for a long time, and somebody who selected Joe Biden as Vice President, who's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I'm going to be happy to have a substantive debate with John McCain about foreign policy.
And here to accept the award, George Stephanopoulos.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you to everyone here at the Annenberg Center for having us back for a second time. And let me also thank Lisa Koenig, my producer, and our whole team at This Week. But the person I really have to thank today is also at the table, Rick Kaplan. Because about 20 years ago, much like Joe, I was ready to start a career in journalism, and Rick Kaplan was convinced that I wasn't ready. He was the executive producer of Nightline, and I was coming out of graduate school, and at least he was kind enough to answer my letter. But it was with one line saying, "We don't have any room for you at Nightline." I came back 10 years later to ABC News and sort of got into journalism sideways. And I want to pick up on the conversation we had this morning as well. I learned from the first phase of my career what a pain in the butt the press could be. And there were many days in my old job, whether I was working on Capitol Hill or in the White House, when I would have a lot of screaming matches with reporters, and a lot of times when I thought that the stories were unfair and disproportionate and not focused on what mattered most to people. But I also know from that experience that when you have power, when you have political power, sometimes the best way to ensure that people use that power wisely and effectively is to make sure they know that someone, on behalf of all citizens, is watching and keeping them honest and keeping them accountable. And there was a time when I was making this switch, and there were a lot of people that were rightfully skeptical of whether I could go from my old job, working in politics, working in the White House, and be a fair, impartial, and Katie and I were talking about this, objective reporter. I'm not sure there's any such thing as objectivity. But one of the most skeptical people, two of the most skeptical people, were Rick Kaplan's former colleagues at Nightline, Ted Koppel and Tom Batag, the executive producer. And they had a lot of questions for me. And Ted came down to my office a couple of times and basically gave me the Nightline treatment in my own office. But one time I was sharing a shuttle ride with them, and at the end of the shuttle ride, they gave me a card. And on one side of the card is the name Fred Friendly. And for those of you who don't know, Fred Friendly is really a legend in the news business. He was Edward R. Murrow's executive producer, and he was also the president of CBS News, who famously resigned, I think it was in 1966, when his bosses at CBS, instead of playing the Senate hearings on Vietnam, on the war in Vietnam, ran reruns of I Love Lucy during the day. And he resigned that day. And on the reverse side of this card is someone who also preceded him at CBS News, probably not as well known, definitely not as well known today, but maybe have had as much influence. He was a man who Fred Friendly said did more than any other single person to inspire imagination and integrity in the news business. His name was Ed Klauber. In 1939, he left the New York Times to help a fledgling news organization learn how to handle a time of transition and change, much like what we're going through now. Now we're trying to figure out how to deal with the internet. At that time, radio and television were the new kids on the block, and no one knew whether you could maintain standards and manage that tradition with integrity and imagination. And what Ed Klauber said, this is how he defined the job, and this is what's on this card. He said, what news analysts are entitled to do and should do is to elucidate and illuminate the news out of common knowledge, or special knowledge possessed by them or made available to them through their sources. They should point out the facts on both sides, show contradictions with the known record. They should bear in mind that in a democracy, it is important that people not only should know but should understand. And it is the analyst's function to help the listener to understand, to weigh, and to judge, but not to do the judging for him. I can think of no better guideposts to how we should do our jobs every day. And in this time of transition and change, I think we should remember the words of Ed Klauber. Thank you very much.
George?